Hi, and welcome back to the channel. Today's sequence is a hip focus sequence, and it is also a full yin sequence as we have done in the last couple of weeks. And if you have done a bit of yin, you've probably noticed that yin is really lower body focused, and that's because it focuses on getting really deep into the joints and the ligaments. And the low body it's comprised of a lot of the bigger and more complex joints in the body, like the knees and the hips. So today's, as I said, is going to be all about the hips, and we'll be working into flexion and extension and abduction and adduction, and moving through many different poses. But as we go into the poses, we will be holding them for about 2 to 5 minutes. And when you practice today, you might want a couple of blocks. You can totally do this whole thing without any sort of support or props. I do recommend it because as you hold these poses, if your bones in your body are supported, then the muscles will start to relax. So a couple of blocks or even a blanket might feel really good today. When you are ready, we will come to a seated position. Actually, we'll come to our backs on our mat. Let's start there. Just start to settle in. You can close your eyes. And as we get started here, let's just allow the legs to be nice and long. You can take one hand to the heart and one hand over the top of the belly. Taking just a couple of minutes to sink down and to prepare. Close the eyes and start to find your stillness. In yin, you can really tap into your awareness. And we start with our breath. There's no need to control your breath in yin as you would in a vinyasa flow. Vinyasa flow has, you're generally using an ujjayi breath. You're creating a slight restriction at the back of the throat. And all I ask of you today is just to observe your breath. No need to control it. Just feel the belly rise on the inhale and release on the exhale. As we continue to ground, we can allow our awareness to expand from the breath, maybe to notice the support of the mat and the earth underneath you, at the back of the thighs, the back of the arms, and the upper back and shoulders. Maybe feel the air and the space above you. Even noting the temperature of the room, maybe the feel of your clothes against your body. Perhaps our awareness starts to broaden even further as we start to become aware of our emotions. Where are our emotions at today? Are they extra big? Are they small and complacent? Emotions and thoughts will undoubtedly come into your practice. And over time, with practice, you'll be able to allow the emotions and thoughts that pass through your mind to come and go without judgment. Only act as the observer and use the breath to return, to allow yourself to sink deeper into the physical, and to relax and to become steady. On the next inhale, let's draw the feet in. Pull the knees to the chest. And we'll just give the front of the shin a squeeze. Enough squeeze just to lift that tailbone up off of the mat. And then release and lower. One more nice squeeze, lifting that tailbone, drawing the knees in. And then allow the tailbone to come back to the mat. From here, you can either roll onto your side or you can slowly take a rock or two to come up to a seated position. And we'll start in our first pose, which is butterfly. So the feet come soles together, making a nice diamond shape with your legs. Now, if your knees are floating pretty good, which mine do, you can have a block or a pillow or a cushion to support your knees, because as we hold this for a couple minutes, we will start to sink a little bit deeper. And if you feel unsupported, you may start to feel uncomfortable. But find where you're at. And since this is a hip focus class, we're going to try to avoid rounding in the back. When we start to round in the back, that puts most of the energy into the spine, and we want to send it into the hips to allow ourselves to fold forward and deepen at the hips. So keeping the back straight, you'll notice as you start to lower and come forward, most of us will have a stopping point, and we're either being forced to stop due to our bony structure within the hip joint, or through a sensation that maybe it's a little too much for us. If you come to a point where the sensation is too sharp, just rise up a little bit more with the back and stay wherever it is most comfortable. Again, as we hold this for anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes, the body should start to relax. Just allow yourself to continue to breathe evenly. The breath will start to lengthen on its own accord. There's no need to force. Maybe as you hold here for a little bit longer, maybe you feel yourself naturally sink deeper into the pose. Think of yourself tilting that pelvic bowl forward, almost like you're pouring a bowl of soup from the inside of the pelvis. There's no need to pull, no need to rush any of the poses. Very slowly on an inhale, let's push ourselves back up to a vertical so the torso is nice and straight. Take the hands behind the hips, lean back slightly, and from here, let's take the legs both to about a 90-degree position, and we'll just windshield wiper the legs back and forth. Feel that rush go back into the hip joint. And when you're ready, we're going to settle back down onto our backs. We're going to prepare for the next pose, which is a wide straddle, which can be pretty difficult just to get ourselves into it right away. So we're going to waken up the back of the legs with a little bit of a hamstring, mostly sciatic nerve stretch. Now, the sciatic nerve can often be a stopping point for us as we lean forward, just as much as the hamstrings are. Hamstrings are naturally tend to be very tight from all the sitting we do. But the sciatic nerve also can very much send our body a signal that's like, wow, we're bending too deep. Let's stop and not go as far forward. So to allow that nerve to glide in the sheath that runs along the back of the leg, we're going to just start with the right knee bent and the foot flat on the floor. The left foot, well, you can either take a hold of using a strap or use your hand to take a hold of the outside of the foot. Draw that left knee in, almost like we're taking a half happy baby. And then we're going to just stretch, kick that heel up to the sky. The back of the leg does not need to fully stretch out. We're not trying to pull or stretch the hamstring. We're just allowing a gentle glide of that nerve in the back of the leg. Do this in your own time, taking about 5 or 6 stretches here. If you pull too much, that will irritate the nerve and it will have the opposite effect of our intention. So we do want to do this with care and just be gentle. And let's let the left foot go to the floor and draw that right foot in. And we'll take that same thing on the right side. You can use the left hand to keep the left hip steady. The right knee drawn down toward the right armpit. And then we'll just start to kick that right heel up to the sky and draw it back down. Take about 3 more here. And when you're ready, we can slowly roll onto our side and we'll come back up to a seated position. Spreading the legs out wide. They don't need to be super wide, but just so we have this nice straddle shape. Now, for most of us, it is difficult to bend forward in this position, in this wide-legged straddle. So if you want to sit up on a block or sit up on a nice folded blanket so that you feel supported and you give that pelvic girdle a little bit more room to make the movement in the forward fold, that can be very helpful. But however you want to take this position, sit up tall. And from here, again, focusing on the hips, we're going to keep the back as straight as possible. Maybe you only come down a little bit. But we're going for a nice straight back. And here's where if you want to use some blocks to bring that earth also a little bit closer to you, it can feel nice to have the forearms supported, keeping the back straight, and just allow the neck to relax. Every pose that we make in yin has an intention. So as I said, if we're working deeply into the hips, that is our intention. We want to feel it into the hips. You naturally will start to feel it into the back of the legs as well. The feet can be relaxed. We don't have to be concerned about keeping the toes pointed and straight. We'll take about 5 more breaths here. This is a very deep hip opener, so wherever you're at, if you found your edge, try to do your best to find stillness and remain still with as little fidgeting as possible. Finding the ease and the comfort. With care, let's come back, bringing the torso upright. You can use the hands to draw the legs in. From here, again, we'll take some windshield wipers. They're so nice in those deep hip openers because it works the internal, the external, the abduction, and the adduction. Then we're going to come around so that we're facing the top of the mat. And we'll prepare for caterpillar. Just as you were in your wide-legged straddle, you may also want to sit up on a folded blanket. A blanket's probably a little easier than a block in this position just because it will provide a more stable foundation. So in your caterpillar, the legs are nice, extended long. Inhale, the arms up towards the sky. And again, keeping the back straight, we start to tilt forward. Maybe you want to start your caterpillar with a little bit of a bent leg. That can also feel very good. As we stay in the pose for a length of time, you may want to shift the hips, walk them back a little bit further until you straighten out the legs. Whatever moves you today. But keeping length in the back from the crown to the tail. Slowly tilting the tailbone forward. Feeling that expansion through the hips, through the glutes, and through the back of the legs. Remember, we're looking for that intention. What are you feeling in your body? Observe this posture in your body. Only use others as an example. And listen to all the ways that you can make it fit you for what feels good for yourself. On an inhale, use the hands to push yourself upright. Maybe walk the hands just behind the hip points. Take just a gentle back bend, lifting the heart up to the sky, pressing the hands down into the mat. A nice inhale through the nose and exhale it out through the mouth if it suits you. And then just since that was such a deep flexion at the hips, let's take the feet so that the soles of the feet are touching and down on the mat. We're just going to take a reverse tabletop to flatten out the front part of that hip, pressing into the mat with your feet, lifting the hips up to the sky. And then on an exhale, let's come back down. You can swing the feet over to the side and we'll come into a tabletop. Since we are in tabletop, let's go ahead and take a moment and use the breath to move through a few cat-cows. Now, these can be any way that you want. You can spiral the hips, move as you're moving through a barrel. You can take a traditional cat-cow, pausing in any area that feels good, whether it's spending a little extra time in the shoulders as you round through cat. Maybe allow the belly to sink low as you come through cow. Whatever feels good. And then we'll come to stillness in our tabletop and we'll set up for shoelace pose. Now this is a great pose to have a block handy. Your left knee, bring that more towards the center of the mat. The right knee we're going to lift up and then draw it behind the left. Open up the feet nice and wide, and if you are very comfortable in shoelace, you can bring the hips all the way down towards the mat. If this is too much on your knees, I suggest sitting up on a blanket or on your block, and that will create a little bit more space for you. Now, if you have one knee that is much lifted, that is no worry. As long as you are comfortable and not feeling any sharp pain, you're perfectly fine in that position. So from our shoelace pose, this is definitely a very deep hip opening pose. Let's sit up tall, and if this is where you need to stay, by all means, go ahead and hang out right there. Otherwise, you can start to walk the hands forward, bending from the hips. Allow the head and the neck to relax. Maybe eventually draping all the way over the legs. Check in with the sit bones. You should be grounded on the left and the right so that we're not just rolling over to the right side. Pause to check in with the breath. Allow the breath to flow freely so we're not holding on to anything. Once you start to hold the breath, the nervous system will start to activate. The muscles will start to activate and tighten. And if the muscles tighten and they're not allowed to relax, that means we can't get deeply into the joints and the ligaments. So as much as we can, allow your body to know that it is in safe hands. And the fascia that wraps itself around the muscles can eventually start to loosen. On an inhale, slowly lift up. From here, you can even use your hands to assist yourself in unraveling the legs. Once more, taking a couple of windshield wipers, leaning back to give yourself a little bit of space. And then from here, we're going to come up into all fours. Step that left foot forward as we come into baby dragon. So the left foot is on the outside of the left hand. Stepping that right knee back so that you're on the more fleshy part at the top, just above the knee. If there is any issues with having your knee directly on the mat in this position, go ahead and grab a blanket or fold over your mat for a little extra cushion. So hanging out here in our baby dragon, we're going to go through a dragon series or a dragon cycle and move through a few different variations of dragons. So all in all, we are going to be in this pose for several minutes. You can start out up here in baby dragon if you want, or if you feel very comfortable and quite open in your hips and you need to find your edge, you may want to come down into your forearms. So if you're up higher and you're not feeling quite enough, go ahead and lower down a little bit deeper. Sending the breath all the way down into that left hip flexor. Relax the muscles in between the eyebrows. Feel the muscles along the cheeks and the jawline soften. And check in with the tongue. The tongue can also relax. And just settle softly behind the top two front teeth. And from here, if you're up high, up on your hands, we're going to come into a winged dragon. So rolling onto the outside of that left foot, opening up even further into that left hip, allowing that left knee to fall open further. You can stay up here. You can also take this down on your forearms. Or you can find a halfway, a middle ground by having your forearms on some blocks. I'm sure by now you're really starting to feel that into the hips. Keep that left foot opened up. If you lower down, come up onto your hands. This will make the next entry a little bit easier. We're going to draw the right heel in and take a twist in our dragon pose. So lifting the left arm up, finding that right foot, and going for the grab. Now you can also use a strap that can help you take a hold of that right foot, drawing the foot in, letting the hips sink down low. Again, you have the option to lower down onto the forearm, finding that foot, opening the chest, gazing up towards the sky. And we'll hold here for our last 1 to 2 minutes. Slowly release that back foot. Draw both your hands to the mat. Go ahead and take your left foot so that the sole is back on the mat. And let's go ahead and push the hips back, almost like we're coming into a hamstring stretch or a half splits. And then you can bend that left knee up again. Step the left foot back. And we're in a tabletop position. From tabletop, let's just go ahead and push back into a downward facing dog. Just as a transition here. Take a nice inhale. Exhale it out through the mouth. And from here, we'll lower back into our tabletop. This time, the right knee comes to center. We'll cross the left knee over the top of the right, opening up the feet, coming once more into our shoelace pose, but now we're on the opposite side, working the opposite hip. So we're going to do that whole sequence, but now we're going to work deeply into the right hip. Find your position on the mat. Make sure that the sit bones are nice and balanced so that we're not tipping more to the left versus the right. And whenever you're ready, either continue to stay seated right here if you're feeling it really into those hips. If you want to make the sensation a little deeper, bend from the hips, start to fold over the legs, walk the hands out, and then fold over the top of the legs. As you do this, keep the intention of the hips feeling heavy and pushing down into the mat. So more of that backward and downward intention and no rolling forward. So we don't want to feel the hips just naturally roll forward as our torso comes forward over the legs. Slowly lift yourself up. Again, you can use the hands to unwind and unravel. Place them behind the hips. Take a couple of windshield wipers, going left and right. And when you're ready, we'll spin those feet behind us. Come through tabletop. Step that right foot up to the outside of the right hand, and we'll come into a lunge on this right side. So baby dragon on the right. You may feel quite different between your left and your right sides, and that is completely natural. So take a moment, set yourself up for success. Pad that left knee if you need to. Stay up on your hands if that feels perfectly deep into that right hip. If you're ready for more, you can lower down onto your forearms, or you can take your forearms to a set of blocks. That's that nice, happy middle ground. To where if the floor is just a little too far away from you, grab some blocks. They're so helpful. Bringing that mat a little bit closer to our body. From here, we start to level up our dragon. So you can stay down on your forearms, or you can come up to your hands, but we'll roll that right foot out so that we're on the outside edge of the right foot and the knee is opening over towards the right. If you want to take it even deeper, you can take the right hand and set it to the inside of that right thigh. Twisting the chest, gazing up towards the sky. Now for our next step in our cycle of dragon, staying on the outside of that right foot, maybe coming up onto your hands to make the grab a little bit easier. Drawing that left foot in, and then opening up towards the right. As you can see, I'm going to stay up high on this side, staying up on my hand instead of coming down on my forearm. My left hip, my left piriformis, the quad are all very tight. Something that I'm working on. Trying to get those nervous system signals to calm down, the muscles to relax. As long as you're practicing safely and then everything feels like we're in a decent stretch, where you're feeling things happen without feeling any pain or sharpness, then that's exactly where you should be. With care, let's release that back foot. You can start to come back onto the sole of the right foot. Maybe heel toe it back into the center. And we're going to push back just for a moment like we were coming into a half splits hamstring stretch. Then maybe bend that right knee again. When you're ready, step that right foot back into a tabletop. We're going to tuck the toes and push into a downward facing dog. Go ahead and walk the dog out. It'll probably feel good into the back of those legs, also into the hips. Since we were in quite a deep hip opener, and now downward facing dog is more of a hip flexion. And then slowly let's lower down onto our knees. The next pose for our sequence is a half straddle. So we're going to extend the right leg out long, keeping that left leg bent. The shin and the heel will come to the outside of the left glute. From here, we're going to start to lean back. You can certainly stay right here. Sitting up on a block will help this intense bend on the knee. You can also use a blanket. And we'll start to lean back. I'm going to stay up on my forearms because this feels really good for me today. You can also lower all the way down to your back. And maybe if you're all the way down on your back, maybe you extend your hands over your head and just allow the arms to relax. As I mentioned, I have a very tight left hip. I'm just trying to keep it happy. Our bodies tell us a lot of things throughout the day. So maybe you're having a hard time squatting in some of your yoga poses. Maybe you feel really sore from sitting in a chair all day. We have to read these signals from our body and then find ways to move that help us feel good again. One amazing thing you can do for yourself is to just get down on the floor instead of always sitting in a nice comfy couch, which does feel really good at the end of the day. When you sit on the floor, it forces your hips to open. It forces your knees to work a little bit more. Now, for some of us, it can be really hard to get down there and probably hard to get back up. So before we start to lose that movement, let's take some care so that we are almost acting like kids again, playing down on the floor, making ourselves comfortable. From this half straddle, go ahead and use your arms to push yourself upright. Start to shift over to the right hip so you can extend that left leg out. And from here, maybe we just want to bend the knees very gently to get some movement back into that knee joint. And then we'll take a moment, leave that left leg extended long, shift over onto the left hip so that you have some room to bring that right leg back, bending the knee, and then the right heel is to the outside of the right hip. Checking in with the sit bones so that we're sitting up tall and we're balanced evenly on both of the sit bones, either staying right here in the nice seated position or starting to lower back. This is definitely not a feeling that we get every single day. This internal rotating of the hip and a very deep bend of the knee. So it's quite understandable if this feels unnatural to you. And maybe have some difficulty staying in stillness and in comfort in this particular pose. That's where the props come in handy. Make sure to sit up higher on a block. Maybe leave out leaning back and just stay seated up nice and high. You'll still get the effects of having the internal rotation at the hip. And slowly use your hands, your forearms, to push yourself up if you were all the way down. Let's roll over onto the left hip. Use your hand if you need to guide that right leg back out in front of you. And then just give the legs a little bit of a wiggle. Okay, now this next one is a very deep hip opener. We're going to try frog pose. So coming into frog, I'm going to go more of a sideways angle so you have a little bit better viewing of frog. You can go the other direction on your mat and you'll find yourself liking that a little bit better because your knees will be padded. So in your frog, let's make sure that the knee and the ankle are in line. So they're in a nice, you have a 90-degree angle between the upper thigh and the shin. And then you can start to lower down onto your forearms. Keeping both of the feet flexed. And then check in with the hips. So we don't want to be leaning forward like this because you're not going to be working too much into the hips. Allow yourself to work the hips back so that they are just about in line with the knees. And from here, relax as much as you can into those inner thighs and the hips. Head can relax down. You can also use a block to support the head and the neck. Or you can take the head all the way down to the hands if that's where you're at in your frog pose. I have a ways to go, and that's fine. I may never reach the floor in my frog pose. That's just how my inner thighs are. They are tight. The belly can allow to be soft. Everything softens and relaxed in this frog pose. Now as we're down here Your next thought is, how do I get out of this? Because as you hold this for a long time, it can feel almost like you can't get back out. So if you're down on your forearms, you can start to draw the feet together first. That's a nice trick. Bring the feet in closer. From there, shift the hips forward, taking some of that angle out. So now we have a nice little bit of length between our heels and our hips. And then you can push yourself up to your hands and then draw the knees back together. And then from here, let's go ahead and take ourselves into a wide-legged child's pose. Hips come back and down. They don't have to touch the heels. Just going for that intention. Feeling that downward feeling of the hips shifting backward and the arms reaching long out in front of you. Wonderful. We'll start to ease our way forward in our wide-legged child's pose. You can kick the heels out to the left or the right, and we're going to spin ourselves around and come down onto our backs and start to close out our practice in Shavasana. Slowly lowering down, extending the legs long, allowing the feet to separate and fall out to the sides. The hands can open. Take up space on your mat and just relax. We have spent a lot of time in stillness today. And you have come a long ways. Remember, in any of these yin practices, if you are practicing on YouTube, if it is a long practice, like most of these are an hour long, and I know that we are all very busy in our day-to-day. Even if you only have time to do a half an hour and to come back later and do the rest of the practice, that half an hour is so well worth it. Making space in your body, building up mobility in your joints, keeping the joints healthy, adding just a little bit of stress to the ligaments can make them stronger. It nourishes the body. Not to mention the peace that we have in the full hour of our yoga practice. Making time with the awareness that we have in our body. I ask today that as you step away from your mat, allow that awareness to linger. Paying attention to the breath, into what you feel, into your body, your joints, your knees, your hips, your spine. You've set up a wonderful foundation for yourself today. When you're ready, go ahead and start to move the ankles. Start to roll the wrists one way and then another. You can either take a couple of rolls to come up to seated or come onto your side. Find your way up into a seated position. Inhale the arms up to the sky. Draw the hands down through heart center. And with a slight tuck of the chin. Take gratitude for yourself for showing up to your mat today. And I thank you for joining me on my channel. If you like this video, please go ahead and hit that like button. Hit subscribe. There's more practices every single week. Have a wonderful day. Make it a great one. Bye.